God bless. This is Mark Anthony DeBello, and you're listening to NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, or NFL ESP, found on the web at NFL-ESP.com. Again, I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. For more information on me and this program, you may go to my website, markanthonydebello.com, and click on the Sports tab. Today is December the 21st, Monday night. The Monday night football game has just wrapped, and now we're into Week 16 of the NFL season. So this program, again, will be 1/2 hour long. We're going to break it up into 3 distinct phases or segments, and that covers the games from the unique data system product consultation service and perspective of NFL-ESP or NFL ESP, and also from the perspective of those who might have an interest in Nevada, and lastly, those who might have a fantasy football perspective. Again, NFL ESP has been proven to increase win production throughout an entire organization, surely as it relates to wins and losses, by a minimum of 10 to 15% in the NFL. And since this is college bowl season, we also have NCAA ESP, and I might relay a little bit of information on that as the broadcast continues. I'm again going to start with the first few minutes here, probably some cultural and societal and general NFL news before breaking down the season standings, last week's games, and then again what to expect the final 2 weeks of the season. And again, we try to cover everything from the P's, the letter P, the perspective of the prophetic, the predictive, and the productive, all as it relates to a team's power, or as I like to say spiritually, God's power, because NFL ESP is broken up into 4 aspects, and those aspects you've heard me mention in the past are the spiritual, motivational, X's and O's, and strategic. And the strategic is based on our exclusive use of a number we call the power spread, which is the differential of our unique and very accurate power rankings. Power rankings became in vogue 3 years ago. We've been doing it for at least 15 years, if not longer. I've been studying football. I just turned 55. For 45 years, actually, 47 years now, since 8 years old, studying all the numbers of the game. And as you may or may not know, I was blessed to play in high school and then in college for the University of Miami Hurricanes in the early 80s when we were starting our dynasty down there. And then I've worked with some NFL teams here, and especially in the CFL with the Montreal 2-time champion, Grey Cup champion Alouettes for Coach Mark Trestman, of the offense coordinator of the Ravens, and then served coach as best as I could last couple seasons with the Bears, except they went with a different analytics person, and now he, the GM, nor Coach Trestman are any of them there because, well, multitude of reasons, but I suspect, but surely they did not use NFL ESP. And anyway, so we have an expression that says if you don't use NFL ESP, you're actually costing your team 2 to 3 wins per season. And that holds true for every team, including the couple teams I interviewed with this year. But again, I appreciate Coach. I appreciate all the, respect everybody who has a job in the NFL, surely everyone who has a job in the media, although, again, the media is the most inaccurate, untruthful, overpaid group I've ever seen, to be honest with you, especially as it relates to pro football. And I heard Coach Dungy, who I respect and love for his Christianity, but he is a terrible predictor, as is his cohort Rodney Harrison, which I already had known and mentioned. If you go to our NFL-ESP.com, you'll see the preseason predictions made on the sports blog there. And again, if you listen to all these broadcasts, you won't hear a more accurate assessment of the NFL from beginning to end. anywhere in the media, and I have been in the past an accredited media member. You can go on my site, markanthonydebello.com, click on the media tab there, or press, and you'll see some of the credentials of games I've covered throughout the years, even been credentialed to the sidelines of NFL games, gaining a unique perspective there. But again, as noted, I'm only rail, if you will, against the media because I wished I had a bigger voice, and the more truthful or better I can use the expression preach football and relay the truth either prophetically, predictively, or productively, I'm willing to accept that, whatever compensation that equals. But to see guys paid, an exorbitant amount of money to give, nothing more than inaccurate opinions, it just unjustly irks me. It's the greatest emotional pain I probably feel throughout a sports season. It's just, it's ridiculous. And now I see on the end of the Monday night game, I think it's John Anderson, who I actually, I think did I don't know, no, I think it was the other guy, the other Anderson who did Wipeout. I was on the reality show Wipeout once, but now he's got this large set, bald, just casually dressed, lumpy kind of guy who just sits there. I don't know what this guy does. I'm sure he's Jewish. Many of them there at ESPN are. So, you'll never hear Merry Christmas out of them. You'll only hear Happy Holidays, if anything. And, God bless everybody. I love the Jewish people. My Savior Jesus Christ was a Jew. So, he picked a great culture to come into. And because they are commandment-based for the most part, hardworking, usually relatively wise, and I don't want to use the expression wise men, since Christmas is coming up. And if I didn't wish everybody a blessed Merry Christmas, I apologize, but a blessed Merry Christmas to everybody. But having said that, there's been a great divisiveness, obviously, between Judaism and Christianity, and it also has shown itself in the media, and whether it's in entertainment or show business and sports, and we know that sports is a combination of entertainment and business, especially the NFL. And I love and respect the NFL. I love and respect Commissioner Goodell, and many of the owners, and wished I was an owner, a player, wish I was just more involved in the league than I am or have been, only because I want to tell the truth. I want to share God's wisdom with people. I have an expression: if you know God, you don't know anything, and that's the God's honest truth. Okay, if you don't know God, you don't know anything, because He is the wisest, He is the smartest, the most intelligent supreme being. He can see in the future. He knows what's going to happen, and I'm blessed to be able to again have the tool of prophecy at my disposal, and I've lived and loved relating it to football. And as you've heard me espouse before, math is a language of God. It's a way He communicates. So I've always been very blessed to be adept at math and able to apply it to football. And I don't even want to say the word expertise. I'll just use knowledge, because every time I hear the word expert on a broadcast and then hear these men spew opinions that are just, and again, inaccurate, or they just analyze a game from a perspective of an eighth grader. A lot of them. A guy scores a touchdown and he'll say, well, great play, they scored a touchdown, and he'll just describe the play. He won't give any analytics or data or numbers behind it. And they'll say, well, the team that scores more is going to win. Okay, thank you. God bless them. But anyway, so it is. So having said that, the only note that I'll make with regards to anything cultural, I guess, again, concussion, the movie's coming out. I already mentioned, we all know that concussions are a part of the NFL game. You know it when you played. I knew it when I played in grade school, Pop Warner High School, but that's okay. You play anyway. So to be surprised by it is a little bit, hypocritical, if you ask me, and I kind of understand the spirit behind it. I don't want to say it here, but people just want to try to, get back something they feel that they were robbed of, and they weren't actually. They knew what they were getting into going in, but the financial thing of the game, everybody wants to sue everybody, and they monetize everything, and it's just tragic to me. It just sullies the game, and it's a beautiful, great, glorious game, the NFL. And I actually heard somebody today they asked Will Smith, the actor who portrays, I guess, this doctor in concussion, where he thinks the NFL is going to be in 5 or 10 years. Well, I can tell you, but I'm not going to share it here. And I will be correct. God bless. I was correct on where it is now, 45 years ago, or 47 years ago. Actually, well, not. I wasn't that long ago. I'd say probably since age 30 when I really came to know God. So anyway, having said that, so that's 25 years, and I've been blessed to be very accurate. So let me go over the NFL. Let's look at the standings, the results from last week, and then again cover the games in the last 20 minutes here, and again against all, across all platforms, which is NFL ESP, the Nevada perspective, and then fantasy. So looking at the games from last week, and then, well, let's go to the standings first. So again, just go back and listen to any recording if you wish to see how accurate I was. You can see them time-stamped for the most part, and that is nothing I'm making up. But New England on top of the East, we figured it would be New England and Buffalo, or Buffalo and New England. Buffalo has been weaker than I thought. The Jets were not surprised. They're doing better than last year. It was a blessing in disguise that they got to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick and not Geno Smith. That has been all the difference for the Jets this season. From our perspective, with a quarterback value of 0 to 9 points in NFL ESP, and Geno Smith was the lowest ranked quarterback we've seen probably in 10 years, ever. Or not ever, just in that 10-year period. So that was a real blessing for the Jets, and you can see how it's reflected in their record. We knew they were a good defensive team. Buffalo, I really can't explain other than we just overrated them, and I'm not perfect, I'll admit it, but again, more accurate than anybody else you'll hear. And again, we had flip-flopped those two when Brady got off the suspension. So now we go to the South, the Texans and Colts. We thought the Colts would be there. I still think the Colts can get there in the end. Andrew Luck being out has obviously cost them. Speaking of, quarterback value, the Texans are not that good a team. And I still even don't think they're going to win that division. I don't think, or at least I got to stick to the prognostication that I made at the beginning of the year. And I look at their final games on the schedule. I think they could lose to Tennessee this week, and I think they could lose to Jacksonville. With Jacksonville having their quote-unquote Super Bowl, which is something you look for in Week 17, a team that you might think has no, way to motivate themselves in a game. To these pro athletes and the coaching staffs and whomever, they, executives alike, they're playing for something, and they're playing to knock another team out. The playoff picture or a division crown, as it would be perhaps, likely for Houston. So, we term it they're playing their Super Bowl, and that's a very, meaningful thing, especially from a Nevada perspective. So, I still think Indianapolis can get there. They play Miami and Tennessee. There's no way I can see them losing to Miami this week, who's basically resigned the season. And then I think in the last week, Tennessee might have their quote-unquote Super Bowl against Indy. One never knows. But again, these two should be right down to the wire. And they actually pushed their game, so I'm not sure what the tie-breaking procedure is. In the North, Cincinnati, again, now with McCarron, they're overrated. They probably shouldn't have beat San Francisco. Multiple turnovers on San Francisco's part. I told you I wasn't a Gabbert or McCarron fan. Gabbert threw INTs right off the bat, cost Frisco the game. But Cincinnati, we thought was overrated at the beginning of the year. They're going to show that even when Dalton gets back. And then Pittsburgh, like I said, I think the wild card you're going to see is Pittsburgh and KC. They're the two better wild card teams in the AFC, a notch above the Jets. And so I already, we've been pretty accurate there. The Ravens, kind of, I can't even get into them right now, and nor do I choose to. So we're not too inaccurate there. In the West, I already mentioned, is the Denver and KC. Those are the two top teams, and then we thought San Diego would be behind KC instead of Oakland, but to Oakland's credit, they're actually a little bit we knew they'd be improved, but San Diego, um, I'm not surprised that they ended up being weaker than Oakland, and we said that at the beginning of the year. So anyway, you've got, again, New England, Denver, Cincy, Houston, and I think it'll be New England, Denver, Cincy. Indy somehow gets there, and KC and Pittsburgh, your wild cards. And then next week I'll, surely, and I can give you the playoffs now as I see it. I think you're going to see it. It's going to be Denver and New England, and then Denver, I think if they keep Osweiler, will get there. The surprise team, a wild card you want to look for is probably Pittsburgh, or actually, Pittsburgh above KC. Although now that Alex Smith runs for KC, it's made them much, much more productive. But again, I would look, to those teams in the AFC. In the NFC, in the East, as we projected beginning of the year, we thought it would be the Cowboys, but when Roma went down, that ended their chances. And then we said the Redskins from the beginning of the year, they're there. It won't be the Eagles or Giants. I can promise you by the end of that all shaking out, we projected the winner of the NFC would be 7-9 or 6-10. So I give Washington a little bit of credit in the fact that I think they'll be 8-8 and win that division. It looks like, or they could still be 7-9 and win the division. But Washington is the best team out of those teams in that division. In the South, Carolina, as I said, is overrated. Although they're 14-0, that's awesome. God bless them. But I think this week you're going to see Atlanta play their Super Bowl, quote-unquote Super Bowl, against Carolina. The Giants kept Carolina close last week. We expected that. And they did so with the spread, quote-unquote spread that Nevada uses. But I think you're going to see Atlanta upset Carolina this week, as we projected Atlanta to beat Jacksonville last week, and they did. But again, as great as Carolina is, as much as I love Cam Newton, and we projected years ago when he was drafted, he should be drafted number one, and that was a wise Carolina decision. But Carolina is the kind of team who can lose early on in the playoffs because of their, inflated record being, again, they're just playing their own division in the East, and I mentioned, a great deal about that last week and the weakness of those two divisions. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. Green Bay and Mini is basically who we projected at the beginning of the year. We had Detroit for a game, but then got right immediately off of them and had a Green Bay and Mini. And you'll see, both those teams as we projected in the playoffs. The surprise team I would look for is Mini. They do very well and do well defensively against, the lower level competition, but against the elites, I noticed they give up more than 20 points. That's sort of the indicator we use. The total number, and this will have a Nevada perspective as well. You can, judge the strength of the teams, but it also means a lot from the NFL ESP perspective that the best teams, we have a record for their games under where they hold their opponents under 20 points. And Minnesota's really good at that, except when they play, a playoff team, they end up just giving up a little bit, usually more than 20. But if they had, that kind of, you want to just look at that as an index or an indicator to really tell the strength of a team. Again, a defense won't give up more than 20 points. So anyway, so having said that, we got Green Bay and Minnesota. Arizona we projected with Seattle. That's not a surprise there, even though Tyrann Mathieu is down for Arizona. That's going to weaken them some. But Arizona, again, is our Super Bowl pick in the NFC from the beginning of the season, and they're looking at like that. I think the one note I'll make is I think Case Keenum is a marked improvement at quarterback for the Rams. So I think they might actually keep that game closer this week in Seattle than people are perceiving from that, quote-unquote spread perspective. And again, I don't even like to use the word spread because we have something called the power spread, which Nevada gets their number from us. But as you've heard me say repeatedly and teach repeatedly, Nevada skews and alters theirs. And then after the media talks and influences it, strictly moves as an index. And it's really just an indicator of who people are investing or, in on the NFL. But again, it doesn't mean any less integrity. I don't believe people need to, and we don't use the B or G word. And I don't think people have to monetize everything, including having, money on games. But again, it doesn't mean the data isn't inaccurate. And you've heard me say before, it's very accurate and the most accurate and undervalued number in all of pro sports. And again, that's what we're trying to do here at NFL ESP is to bring that to coaches and in all, pro and college, big-time leagues like football and basketball, and let them know how to make the most probable and productive based on the percentages and that number basic strategy decisions to improve their win-loss record and their overall organization, including the bottom line. So anyway, having said that, those are the two teams we projected at the end of the year, and I just wanted to make that note about Seattle, and now I'll get into this week. Just noting quickly that that's a little bit of an inflated value that they have already posted in Las, and I don't even want to say the city's name, Sin City. Okay, we'll just say that. And I think you'll see people investing in Seattle as the week goes on, and that number will balloon up a little bit more. And then, again, in the that covers the NFC then. So as far as the playoff picture goes, I think it's Atlanta and Green Bay. I would look for Arizona and Green Bay, and I would look for Seattle to get there. I think Seattle is better than Green Bay. We felt so at the beginning of the year, even when Green Bay beat them earlier in the season. I think Green Bay beat them, right? The team I would snooker, to use a word, is Carolina, meaning watch them to lose in the first round, especially if they lose this week, and then rest. I mean, everybody's talking about resting players in Week 16 for Carolina. They got to get past this week, and that's going to be an affront to people in Atlanta that they're bypassing them. That's a real motivator. You can say put it on the chalkboard, as you'll hear, coaches say, but I think that's going to really rub Atlanta and motivate them this week. That people are already talking about, is Carolina going to rest players next week? Well, they got to get past this week, and I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to see them get defeated, and then forget any team in the NFC East. So, again, if I had to write, basically from the beginning of the year, we had Arizona in the Super Bowl. And I think again the change to Coach Kubiak, and to Brock Osweiler is the big difference in Denver. Now, as far as and enough to make them better than they were last year, which we projected they would be the surprise team to get beat, and they did, and everybody had Denver winning the Super Bowl. So again, I would keep Manning on the bench, but that's just me, and God bless me and God. So anyway, having said that. Quickly, I'll go over last week's results and get us into this week. And you've already heard me mention a lot of what happened last week. And I try not to toot my own horn, but, I just have to give the information. Detroit, New Orleans, we said Detroit would probably beat New Orleans or upset them. They did. St. Louis over Tampa, we basically projected that in a game that was relatively close. Jets and Dallas in a game closer than we thought. We had the Jets. Minnesota and Chicago. Minnesota, again, the better team than Chicago. They won. We projected Atlanta upset Jacksonville. They did. This one was the biggest surprise and basically the only surprise we had. I didn't think there was any way Houston would beat Indy. They did. Have to admit I was wrong there. No excuses. Indy, just needs Andrew Luck. So Carolina and the Giants, as we said, it would be close enough for the spread that, our power spread was a little bit different, but you got an inflated version in Nevada, and the Giants covered that. Tennessee, New England, Tennessee, we had New England, thought Tennessee might be able to cover the power spread. They should have. They just missed. Buffalo and Washington, got to admit, was surprised by this one. Not that surprised, but we like Buffalo. But again, they're an overrated team this year. This was one of the ones we were actually a little bit incorrect about. KC over Baltimore, we said that Kansas City probably win that one handily, and they did, and Baltimore was going to start having the Q word take effect. And that's, I think, that hasn't totally happened. They're still trying, God bless them, but they're just decimated. And it's just a little too tough. Just the tiring and the fatigue factor. Seattle over Cleveland. I actually thought Cleveland could upset Seattle, but there was obviously no chance of that happening. I didn't really focus on that game. But, of course, that's not a surprise there result. Green Bay we thought would beat Oakland. It was close as we, projected it, and they did. Denver should have beaten Pittsburgh. I don't know how Pittsburgh got back into that game, to be honest with you. 21-0. They won the second half, but Denver was live. Had won, led throughout. Miami over San Diego. We projected San Diego one of our best plays. And then in the Nevada perspective as well. Miami's mailed it in, I think, for the rest of the season. San Fran and Cincy, again, we thought San Fran could upset Cincy. They should have. They only lost because of those turnovers in a game that Cincy ended up winning. In Arizona, we mentioned would thump Philly, and Philly give up a lot of points. For you fantasy players, Johnson had a big day fantasy-wise. We went to Fitzgerald. That was a mistake. Should have went to Johnson. Because when you're, and here's a fantasy tip, the two running backs are a very key part of fantasy football. They're the guys you really have to lock in and score. And you really, to do that, you want to have a team who looks like a sure shot winner. They don't need to throw to win. Okay, the fantasy receivers won't put up a lot of big numbers. When your team is the quote-unquote underdog, then the receivers do well, especially if that underdog wins. Then you have a surprise, high-scoring fantasy player on your hands. But when you're a clear-cut favorite and you win as a clear-cut better team, then you want to have that team's running back. So Arizona was a good running back this week, and then we had the other good running back, which was Danny Woodhead from San Diego. So those were probably your two best running backs to have. And again, I just made a mistake there. I didn't give fantasy enough time as I was out of town, and I went to Fitzgerald and Woodhead. I actually also had Devontae Freeman and Julio Jones for Atlanta, and when they won, those players scored well. But that could have been, again, flipped around a little bit and, won you your fantasy league. So anyway, in the last 4 minutes here, let me knock out this week quickly. And I apologize if I've, well, I'm not going to apologize. God bless. I'm doing my best here. So Oakland plays San Diego. This game's going to be closer than people think. It could go either way, actually. San Diego, I think, is going to pick up steam here a little bit at the end of the year in Oakland. These two teams always play each other tough. Philly's going to have to get home calls. It's the only way they're going to beat Washington. They're probably going to get them in a must-win game for Philly. Washington is the better team more times than not. I would think Washington was going to win this game. And I think, again, Philly just gets a huge home field advantage. So we'll have to see what happens there. Minnie's playing the Giants. It's now with Beckham suspended. I can't see Minnesota winning that game by less than 20 points. I just threw that number out. But 2 touchdowns better than the Giants for sure. Especially at Minnesota. And again, without Beckham, he's the best player on that team by far. And Manning won't have anybody to throw to. So there's no way Minnesota doesn't have a double-digit, huge win there. Tampa-Chicago's a toss-up because, again, you never know. Jameis Winston's a lot like Eli. They like to just throw it up there. So you don't know what's going to happen in that game. Again, I already mentioned Atlanta upsetting Carolina. Buffalo against Dallas. Buffalo, I think, is the better team. They should win at home. However, for those from a Nevada perspective, Dallas is a live number. I'll use that term as 6.5, and that typically means you want to lean toward the underdog there. So keep an eye on that. Jacksonville, New Orleans. I think Jacksonville is the better team. I think that Jacksonville can actually go in there and beat New Orleans. So I would lean toward them. Detroit and San Francisco. Detroit, I think you're going to see these guys playing for their jobs. They know there's a lot of turmoil there. They're the better team than San Francisco. That number, from a Nevada perspective, I think is high. Again, nobody's given San Fran any credit. They didn't give him credit against Cincy, and they should have, won that game. Kansas City should defeat Cleveland. Again, Johnny Football, I love him. And he's a quote-unquote wild card, and he's a real risk-reward type of guy. If he has a huge game, that's the only way they can upset. But it's got to. If I was Cleveland, I would have revolved my whole franchise around that kid. To be honest with you, gotten him clean and sober from day one, and then just built the whole. Had him be the new, the Russell Wilson in that league, in that conference. But they never did that in Cleveland, and they suffered for it. Indy should not lose to Miami, even if it's in Miami, which it is. The Jets in New England should be a real close game. The Jets, actually kept New England close. And from our data, that game was a tie, even though New England had won the first time around. And now New England has more injuries than they had then. So that should be a close game. Tennessee against Houston. Tennessee is an inflated number out in Nevada, but I think they're going to beat Houston, especially now that they're down to the third-string quarterback. Arizona, as I mentioned, is a better team than Green Bay, but this is your best game on the card probably. You've got your two best, NFC teams here. Arizona and Green Bay should be an NFC preview, if not Arizona and Seattle. Seattle, I already mentioned, against St. Louis. That number is definitely too big from a Nevada perspective. But if you're St. Louis with Case Keenum, you got to take some basic strategy chances. You got to roll the dice, as they say. You got to make some aggressive basic strategy decisions. Pittsburgh should beat Baltimore. I love the Ravens, and prayerfully get an interview with them next season. And again, can only hope that the Ravens play hard, which they've been doing. But again, they've just been decimated. Pittsburgh, obviously, the better team there. And then lastly, I don't see Denver losing to Cincinnati. They should win quite comfortably in that game. Cincinnati, they don't take a lot of aggressive basic strategy decisions. Coach Lewis, that's why they never get very far in the playoffs, because they're usually underdogged in the playoffs and they don't quite realize that. And again, if Denver sticks with Osweiler, they should win that one very well. So anyway, that's it for this week. Listen, God bless you, and a Merry, blessed Christmas to everyone, and to all of you, good night. This has been NFL Moneyball. I'm your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. Thank you, and God bless you.